Violent clashes erupted in Southport last night as a group of rioters descended on the town, injuring almost 40 police officers.
Police described the disorder as sickening and linked it to supporters of the English Defence League. It came shortly after thousands gathered for a vigil for victims of Monday's stabbings. And we're joined now by former Inspector at Merseyside Police, Peter Williams, who's in Southport this morning. Thanks for joining us, Mr. Williams. Before we get on to the events of last night, can we just ask you to explain to our viewers what will be happening at the moment with the police handling of the suspect? He's not been named. Will he be being questioned now?
Well, I would imagine there's a lot of forensic evidence in particular to be gathered in this particular case. There's also the basic sort of police work that we would expect to happen, like the house-to-house inquiries, trying to track down eyewitnesses, knocking on doors, looking at for CCTV and videos, some doorbell evidence. Once all that has been gathered and a fuller picture of the events of Monday have been obtained, so the police sort of know what they're talking about, they will then consider interviewing the male that's been arrested. But I would stress there's in the forensic element of this particular case, not only from the scene here to where I'm standing here at Southport, there's also the venue from where the suspect was arrested. So effectively, Merseyside Police are managing two scenes. Now, that's a lot of commitment in terms of gathering evidence. And your question in relation to where they're up to the investigation, of course, under English laws, we know, we're subject to time limits. That's normally about 24 hours, but it can be extended to 36 on authorisation of a senior officer. That would have ended at about 1 o'clock this morning. So what will have happened yesterday afternoon, early evening, I would imagine, is that Merseyside Police, via the CPS, will have applied for a warrant of further detention, which can extend the custody period to a period 96 hours, which gives them till around about lunchtime on Saturday. Now, they're going to need that time because there's going to be that much evidence to be gathered here. It's pointless speaking to any suspect in any criminal investigation unless you are in possession of the full facts.
And the police have said that they don't believe at this stage this is terror-related. But of course, they will be looking back, not just within policing, but also other government agencies and security services to find out if this individual has had any previous contact with those agencies, whether any concerns have been raised about him in any way in the past, whether he's had any previous convictions or interviews with the law. Do we have any sense at all yet from the police as to whether there is any past history?
Well, not that I'm aware of, but it's an interesting point that you raise in relation to the suggestion that there may have been a terror element at some stage here. If so, counter-terrorism policing Northwest will take over the investigation supported by Merseyside Police. That hasn't happened yet. It's still Merseyside Police that are leading this investigation. But the whole issue, what you're talking about there, of course, links to this issue of motivation. Now, we've heard quite a lot about that. At the moment, there doesn't appear to be an obvious motivation, but it's important for the police to establish what that actually is, because not only do we need to know what it is, we need to be able to prove what it is, because the police have to prove in any criminal offence what we call the mens rea, why the individual has done it. Now, they will be looking into his background, which of course will include intelligence.
And Peter, of course, that goes right to the heart of those riots last night. Misinformation. The Daily Telegraph today saying Russian state media among those falsely identifying the suspect as an asylum seeker who'd arrived by boat. Not true, of course. He was born in the UK. Sharing claims he was on an MI6 watch list. Nobody knows that as yet. How deeply disturbed were you by what you saw? Your colleagues, essentially, in Merseyside Police Force and other forces having to deal with, on top of already a very, very important investigation into those crimes against those girls?
Well, actually, I was completely and utterly shocked by it because, when the dust has settled here, literally, and we see what's happened, we can see that this was coordinated, pre-planned disorder of people who have come into Southport, into Merseyside from outside of the area. But all the media were here last night. I was watching the images myself, and there was clear evidence of suspected criminal offences being committed. Violent disorder, arson, criminal damage, and here this morning you can see the evidence of that. And really the people that are involved in that are sort of going to find out that shortly Merseyside Police will be turning their attentions to that disorder, what happened last night, by using all aids we've got available these days, such as facial recognition. And the people who were involved in this disorder last night, over the next coming days and weeks, in fact, will be receiving knocks on the door. And that will, result in subsequent court hearings, and I've no doubt at all, in the case of convictions, the sentencing judge will take into account the circumstances and the timing of what actually happened last night.
Just a brief word, really, because the police officers who were involved in last night's riot, somebody knocked unconscious, a dog was burned. I mean, it's absolutely insane what happened last night. And then you've got the emergency services who actually were at the scene of the stabbing. What effect does all this trauma have on those? You know, those police officers are also perhaps fathers and mothers, their brothers and sisters. They are real people who have to live with what happens to them and what they see and deal with. We saw that they were in tears, some of the services who dealt with the stabbing. Just from your point of view as an experienced officer, what effect will all of this have on the officers who are dealing with this right now?
Well, it will have had an effect, particularly, all the first responders that attended, fire and rescue, the police, and of course the paramedics, and we've heard from them. But at the end of the day, in the case of the investigation and the investigations, Merseyside Police are a professional organisation, and they will go about their job in a professional way in relation to the investigation into the absolute tragedy of these girls, in the professional manner that we know that they will do that. They've proved that over the years. For example, the shootings we witnessed over a couple of years, they resulted in convictions and lengthy sentences. And of course, they'll be going about their job now in exactly the same way, because they are a professional organisation, and that all their own personal feelings will be set to one side.
Yeah.
Peter, thank you so much for that. Was so informative. We really appreciate you talking to us this morning. Thank you very much.
As the heartbroken people of Southport came together last night to mourn together the tragic deaths of those beautiful girls, 6-year-old BB King, 7-year-old Elsie Stancombe, and 9-year-old Alice De Silva Aguirre. Those people were then forced to endure another horrible situation. This time, violence brought to the town by outsiders determined to wreak havoc. Hundreds of rioters fighting running battles with the police, attacking a local mosque, a police van was set alight. In the end, 39 police officers were injured and 3 dogs were also hurt during those violent clashes.
The Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper, said those responsible will face the full force of the law. And in a moment, we'll talk to our correspondent, Nithya Rajan, who's at Alderhay Children's Hospital, where some of the young victims of Monday's knife attack are receiving critical care. First, though, we can go to our chief correspondent, Richard Gaisford, who's at the scene of last night's riots. Richard, the whole town appeared to be united in peaceful mourning at the early evening vigil. And then suddenly, as the evening went on, we saw these terrible scenes of rioting, bricks thrown, police vans on fire. Truly shocking.
Yeah, and just before that, hundreds of hooded, masked young men coming into the area, many think from outside, making their way to a mosque here in Southport. Take a look behind us this morning and you can see what is effectively a community clear-up. But the streets now looking quite clear, but from the pictures we shot at sunrise this morning, you can see what looked like a war zone. The most incredible scenes of devastation all the way around this area of Southport, where we witnessed the bricks, the bottles, the fireworks that had been thrown at police. There were bits of burnt police van there on the ground. The metal so hot in that it had melted onto the road surface. And then so quickly, this community clear up, springing into action. People turning out to try and get the streets open as quickly as possible. What's noticeable this morning is there are no police here. In fact, the original people that turned up, they weren't even from the council. It was a local construction company starting that clear up with the machinery that they had, wanting to bring some sort of sense of normality back to an area that had suffered so much. I think this community at the start of the week was in mourning, in shock because of what had happened with the murders of those young girls and all those others that have been so badly injured. Now they are in shock because of what has happened. There's an awful lot of anger here on the ground from people that their community has been targeted in this way. Violence as these protesters, these rioters fought with police outside of the mosque here.
Well, we can go over to Nithya Rajan, who is at Alder Hey Children's Hospital. Nithya, do we know anything more about the condition of those children who are being cared for behind you, and of course the adults too, who are elsewhere in hospital too?
What we know so far, Ranbir, is that 5 of the children and 2 adults remain in critical condition. The victims of the knife attack were taken to 3 hospitals around the region, including the one that I'm at. And the whole town of Southport has come together to grieve what happened. The 3 little girls who lost their lives have been named. They are 6-year-old BB King, 7-year-old Elsie Stancombe, and 9-year-old Alice Da Silva Aguirre. At the vigil last night, which began at 6 p.m, parents, families, friends all came together. There were at least 1,000 people who stood shoulder to shoulder, standing in silence and paying their respects. I spoke to a priest who knew Elsie and her family, and he told me the thing that he remembered the most about her was her beautiful smile. And of course, Southport is a town where the neighbours say everybody knows someone, and it's not just close friends and family who have been left grieving. So many of the parents that I met yesterday are also processing what happened.
You take your children to daycare to do a bit of dancing. You expect to come and pick them up a few hours later.
Yesterday was the first day of our holiday workshops, doing exactly what these girls would have been doing. So it's just very close to home. It's just not fair. And they were just little girls making bracelets, singing songs, and it's just, they should be safe to do that.
Well, the question that is now on everybody's mind is why this happened, and they will have to wait for some time yet for answers.
Yeah, and you just really notice in that clip you showed there of the lady with the young girl beside her, that young girl was just looking down, eyes closed. You think, what on earth is that child feeling about what has just happened in her community? It's absolutely horrifying.
It's the reference to making bracelets.
That gets you, yeah.
Young girls at a Taylor Swift dance club at the beginning of the school holidays making friendship bracelets,
yeah,
which, of course, at the concerts you give to strangers.
Yeah. And
a stranger comes into the room and devastation occurs. It's just shocking.
Yeah, well, on the other side of that coin is the rioting, is that, you know, the awful, awful violence that was rained upon a grieving community in Southport. Well, Merseyside's Police and Crime Commissioner Emily Sporrell joins us now. I mean, your heart must have sank when you saw that this was happening. Were you aware that there was a coordinated plan by the far right to turn up last night?
I attended the vigil last night, and as you say, it was a brilliant show of community resilience, of showing community support and just sending solidarity to all the families. So deeply disappointing to see the scenes that we saw after that, with the violence that was being directed particularly at our officers, who were the same officers who had gone to respond to the knife attack on Monday lunchtime. So really, really distressing and upsetting scenes. We obviously became aware that there was some talk on social media of gatherings, so the police had put an appropriate response in place to that. But as you can see, the violence and abuse was just utterly abhorrent and completely unacceptable.
Can we ask you about what you know about the people involved in this? You are the Police Crime Commissioner for Merseyside, and Merseyside Police said last night that the large group of people believed to be supporters of the English Defence League began to throw items towards the local mosque. So the police clearly believe it's the EDL, far-right activists. How much do we know about how coordinated this was? Did people come from across the country? Who are the ringleaders? And what will be the police response to people who have been breaking the law in this way?
These are all the things that Merseyside Police will be doing now. They will obviously be reviewing the footage of exactly who was there last night. They have been monitoring the online activity as well, trying to understand, who was doing what. They have said that they believe it was, members of the English Defence League. They don't believe it was individuals from the local area. There is a strong feeling that there are individuals like the EDL who have been using this incredibly tragic event to whip up hatred, incite violence, and that's the result of what we saw last night. So, there is a strong sense that this is people who have come from out of area simply to create violence and abuse against officers and towards a community who are not in any way accepting of this behaviour.
And, the racial element of this is what's been stoked up by misinformation online and so on. What are your thoughts? We heard from the imam who was barricaded inside the mosque, and he said to us, we've been here for 30 years. We've never had a problem with anybody. I mean, just give us a sense of the fact that actually, racial division in Southport, is it something? Is there an undercurrent there, or did this yesterday literally come from outside?
Everyone in the community has been telling me that this is absolutely not something that they represent. As you say, the mosque has been there for a number of years, and the community has, lived, worked, been together side by side, and there have not been these issues. The local community are very clear that this is not what they want. They celebrate their diversity. They welcome the fact that they have these individuals in their community. These are far-right thugs who have come from out of area. They've decided to target a mosque because it fits their ideology, not because there is anything to suggest that the individual who committed the act on Monday is Muslim. They have created this speculation. They are sharing this misinformation simply to pursue an ideological agenda, which is racist and totally abhorrent, and the local community absolutely reject that.
Yeah,
Thank
Emily
you,
Sparrow.
Emily Sparrow, the Police and Crime Commissioner for Merseyside. I know we need to let you go, so thank you for talking to us this morning. And we can turn to ITV News UK editor Paul Brand, who was caught up last night in the violence. He's up in the northwest again this morning. Before we turn to Paul, let's just see firsthand what Paul experienced last night.
3 innocent kids are dead, mate. 7, 6 and 9. What are you reporting? You
Right, Paul.
Goodness me.
Morning to you. What were you expecting when you turned up, and what did you face?
Well, morning both to both you and Ed this morning. Having covered many of these sort of events over the years, you kind of know the difference actually quite quickly between a protest or a demonstration with a purpose, with a message, where they're trying to make maybe a political point, and they want the cameras there to capture that and to have a national debate about whatever issue it is that they might be pursuing. The difference between that and organised violence, which was definitely this last night. And as soon as we turned up, it was pretty clear the media weren't welcome. And the only reason I posted that footage online last night was to try and explain that to people, that it is difficult for us to engage with this crowd. They don't want us to be there because, of course, if they're captured on camera, then their criminality may well get them into trouble. So I was down here from right at the start of that event last night, and it was obvious, as I say, from the start. People were spilling into the town. They were running down the roads. They were coming down here to the mosque, where very quickly we saw them starting to pelt bricks and stones at the mosque. They were stripping them off local residents' walls here, actually. A lot of the coping stones have gone from the walls here, and I spoke to residents who are absolutely horrified by this. These houses that just face onto the mosque, actually, people were trapped inside here, unable to leave their homes. I spoke to one family who had an 11-year-old girl inside in absolute floods of tears, as if she hasn't been through enough in the past few days, as if she hasn't got enough horrors on her mind. And some of the residents we saw actually did confront the crowd, but they just got abuse in return, saying, "You're the problem, you're the ones," in their words, letting immigrants into the country. You've just heard there from the Police and Crime Commissioner. There is no explicit link here that we're aware of to Islam at all. This is other people trying to draw a broader conclusion from all of this, partly based on disinformation, I'm afraid, online. And that has just left people here absolutely reeling this morning. I mean, I know Rich has been talking about the clean-up operation. It is extraordinary, and I can tell you, I haven't spotted one person here this morning who was part of that violence last night, helping these poor residents to clean up their own town. And it'll be their council tax bill, of course, that goes towards paying for some of this.
Well, we heard early this morning that footage without the beeps, and we heard the language being used towards you.
This was off-air, we heard.
Off-air, yeah. Before the show started. It's truly shocking. And, of course, we didn't show that live on the television, but we heard it. In my life, it's only on rare occasions, actually, sometimes when you get caught on the edge of football violence, that you hear that degree of racism, no surrender, but also the violence in the language. I mean, we were talking about thugs earlier. I mean, that is what you were faced with, wasn't it?
Yeah, and look, as I say, when you cover enough of these events, you know the difference quite quickly between a protest and organised violence. These people had come already masked up. They'd come with their hoods up. They wanted, in my view, a fight as they arrived into the town. Things escalated incredibly quickly. This wasn't a case of people gathering to make a point and then perhaps having a bit of a standoff with police, and then it's slowly escalating and sadly spilling to violence. No, this was violence from the start. People came here to throw objects at the mosque. When police confronted them, tried to protect the mosque, then the police, of course, became a target themselves, and you see that in so much of the video, and the people were, the crowd were enjoying it, quite frankly. And as I say, it was local residents left on the sidelines begging them to stop. Yeah, well,
on some of the footage you can hear the people just laughing. I mean, nobody in Southport's laughing. Nobody in the country's laughing except for those thugs. Just to be clear, you know, you're our UK editor. There is misinformation that was used to stoke this, right, out there, all sorts of things. Can you just set the record straight so far as to what we actually do know and what is wrong?
Yeah, so what we know so far about the suspect, and he's under 18 as well, Ranveer, so I just want the viewers to understand that's partly why we can't give out every piece of information that we have about him. There are legal restrictions about what you can say about a suspect under the age of 18. That's the case for every crime allegedly committed by somebody under the age of 18. But we know that he was born in Cardiff. We know that he moved to Southport while he was at primary school. His parents are originally from Rwanda. I've spoken to people who know the family, who say there's nothing particularly interesting about the family, nothing that stands out about the family. They're fairly regular people. Other sources have described to me that the 17-year-old has a troubled or a complicated past, but at the moment police are trying to establish the motive here. What we are pretty confident about at this stage is there's no reason to think there's a link to Islam. We don't think that the suspect is a Muslim. Most people from Rwanda, for example, his parents would be Christian, so it doesn't really add up that there is a link to, certainly not this mosque anyway, in the centre of Southport. But because there's been that disinformation online, a false identity was circulating. I don't know how that really began. It seemed to originate on an American website that was then shared and shared and shared until it became so big that it almost became perceived to be the truth. And that, police have said, is absolutely false. They've been very concerned about that information spreading, and they took the unusual step yesterday of saying it is a lie. Perhaps that helped to feed what happened last night, but really I think people came here with a preconceived idea of what they wanted to do anyway, and no amount of information or disinformation was going to change that.
All right. Thank you so much, Paul. It's always reassuring to have you outline all of that, because I think lots of people will be scratching their heads who, you know, aren't obviously EDL or right-wing, will just be thinking, well, why aren't we naming him? Who is he? What's going on? So it's really important that we make all that very clear. Thank you so much, Paul.
Thank you, Paul.
And thank you for your reporting from there last night and this morning.